So good morning, everybody. It is 9:02, so we are going to get started because we have a large load of questions for this month. So I'm super proud. Thanks, y'all, for being inquisitive and uploading your photos and asking all of those timely seasonal garden questions. That's really the whole purpose of office hours and why we started this. And it really joys my heart when everybody participates and we get lots of questions rolling in. So this is going to be a really fun session. Sadly, this is our last scheduled office hours for 2024. So we've been hitting it hard and heavy all growing season. We approached it a little differently this year, focusing all of our office hours on these months where we do get those heaviest loads of questions. And that's not to say that more won't continue to roll in at the local county offices for those agents who are on the call with us. And of course, Master Gardeners, we know that you all help us field questions out in the community year round. So much appreciation for that. And we just love hosting office hours as a way for everybody to get to learn simultaneously and do this together as a group. So I want to thank y'all for tuning in each month and for your great interaction, and also want to make sure that you know that all of these questions and the answers and the pictures are being uploaded onto our interactive state map. And you can access those anytime that you like. Andrea, can you tell them a little bit about where they can go to find that map? And I'm sure we can send them a direct link to that map when we do our wrap-up email too.
Absolutely. So it is embedded in the UT Horts site. And so that is probably the easiest place to find it. And I will get the tiny link and post that in the chat. So please be looking for that.
Excellent. Okay, good deal. Thank you. Okay, so we're just going to jump right in. And the way I've organized questions today is we are going to start with vegetables, transition into fruits, and then I've kind of joined kind of ornamentals and turf together. So let's just jump right in. So one of our first questions in the vegetable realm says, I'm seeing some yellowing leaves on my tomatoes. Wait, before I go there, I forgot to introduce myself. We may have new people on here. Speakers, please try to remember to introduce yourself before you jump in with answering a question. I'm Celeste Scott, and I'm the Western Region Horticulture Specialist over here in Jackson. So welcome to anybody who this may be your first time joining us. So now we're going to jump in to these vegetable questions. The first one says, I'm seeing some yellowing leaves on my tomatoes. Is this a disease or maybe something environmental? And then at the end it says, with all this rain. So that tells me that they are not living where I'm living. Or maybe this question was submitted, about 5 to 6 weeks ago when we were still getting some pretty even amounts of rain. So let me share this screen so we can kind of see the picture that they sent in with this. Here is our photo. Excellent photo, by the way. And I'm trying to zoom in here so we can, here we go.
All right. So tomatoes to get us started off, tomatoes through the season. And this is something that I've actually seen a little bit more this year than I have in some previous years. Now, when we look at tomato leaves, it, I guess I should say, as a horticulturist, that we can make hypotheses, but, we don't always know for sure. Some of the leaf diseases look similar. Some of the fungal diseases and the bacterial diseases can actually look a little bit similar. But some of the things that I would kind of tune in on in this picture are that, of course, we're seeing, small, very small circular spots. And so there will kind of be three things that I would think about. Early blight can start actually pretty small. That's a fungal disease, Alternaria. Septoria is another fungal disease that often we see in tandem with early blight, but actually I would lean a little bit more towards bacterial spot or a Xanthomonas type bacterial disease for this one, because we're actually seeing some of that purpling on the edges of the leaves. Now, another thing that would be really good from a diagnostics perspective is to say, are they seeing anything on any fruit? because if we have a bacterial disease, like some of the bacterial speck, bacterial spot, those are things that can cause, small lesions on our fruit. And that can be extremely characteristic because while early blight can infect fruit, it looks a lot different. It's up near the stem of the fruit and things like that. So I would kind of lean a little bit bacterial on this picture, but there are more things that we could kind of look at. And so, to get to the application of that discussion is that it's really important to kind of think, are we going bacterial or are we going fungal? Because some of our most common, preventative protective types of fungicides like a chlorthalonil, the name brand Daconil, are not going to be effective if in fact this is bacterial. So copper would probably be the direction that I would go. Copper can have effect on both our fungal and our bacterial diseases. And since it's fall, I'm sorry, I'm on a monologue here. I would also be really good on sanitation because those bacterial diseases can stay on steaks and things like that. So sorry, I talked too long. Greg, Bob, jump in there if you've got other thoughts.
I'm just gonna throw in on like the funny side of things. I'm tired of tomatoes, and I'm gonna let them just pass on to where they
Like,
are heading next.
It's like whoever can drum up energy for tomatoes at this time of year, please continue talking.
Yeah.
So Natalie, and correct me if I'm wrong, on when we start looking at bacterial diseases, basically in any plant environment, whether it be tomatoes or other garden vegetables, generally our fungicides are not effective against those bacterial diseases. And that's why as a homeowner, we're generally recommending that about all you have is copper and maybe some sulfur, one of those categories to control those. So we talked a few series back about, again, emphasizing, and I know we sound, and this audience probably understands broken records, that we preach so much about cultivar selection and disease resistance within those. And some of these bacterial diseases, the best way that we can control those are through resistant cultivars.
Yes, and Greg and I didn't discuss this, but that is a perfect lead in. I was walking through my own pepper trials yesterday evening, and this has been an uncharacteristically high bacterial leaf spot year for me. I've seen it in tomatoes and in peppers, which what it probably means is that I was sourcing seeds from a whole bunch of places earlier this spring and had a little bit more come in seedborne and then spread through the greenhouse. So, I'll take the credit for that. But it has been a really interesting year because I have really been able to see the cultivars, especially peppers, right, that have bacterial leaf spot resistance. And we have a lot now, especially on our bells, and the ones that do not. And so this is actually a picture of the cultivar Carmen, which is a really, typically very productive kind of some people call it Italian bullnose or, a roasting pepper. And it is one that does not have bacterial leaf spot resistance. And so you can see the impact here late in the season. Now I've had, 2 or 3 sprays of copper. I've, maintained the general productivity, but they're starting to go downhill now. And I just wanted to share that sometimes when we have bacterial leaf spot issues, and it can cause, some fruit lesions as well, it can lead to some secondary damage. So I have actually seen more kind of soft rots on my Carmen fruit than I typically do this year. And my hypothesis, which I will share but say has not been confirmed by a pathologist, is that sometimes those primary fruit issues can lead to secondary fruit issues because you have that wound that then some of those secondary soft rots can get in. So for this year in particular, I'm really seeing much better plant production and health later in the season for the ones that do have some bacterial leaf spot resistance.
So Celeste, one thing, and this might serve as a segue into our other questions that we had regarding the grapes. The homeowner here talked about during this wetness, and a lot of times people fail to realize that you don't have to have weeks of rain or wetness to have disease pressures. Depending
That's
upon
right.
the ambient air temperature, the cooler it is, typically the longer the plant has to stay wet. But the warmer the ambient air temperature, the shorter that time period that plant can stay wet, and that pathogen actually set up shop on that plant and proliferate. And so we think about rain events, but if we get a couple of days, that extends more than a 24-hour wetness period, we can have an environment that's conducive for disease growth if we have a susceptible plant host. And so we don't have to have months and months of rain. We can just have a couple of days, or maybe like this time of year, we start getting so much condensation on plants. Those plants stay wetter later and later. I know there was some old research years ago talking about apple scab. If you had a plant that stayed wet for more than 12 hours, chances are pretty good you were going to have an apple scab if you weren't using a resistant cultivar. And I think the same can go for a lot of these tomato plants. If we're not using resistant cultivars, where we want to stick to our heirloom tomatoes and we don't want to use any pesticides, then that kind of is a formula for disease. And depending upon the tomatoes is a big one, and I think we've got some questions regarding grapes. And grapes is another one that is a great host plant for disease pathogens.
And I'll just add, this is kind of like reaching over into that ornamental sector, but even on take zinnias, for example. I have zinnias that were going in a cut flower trial that have not had any rain on them, like rain from the sky, for 5.5 weeks. They are getting irrigated through, underneath through drip irrigation, and they have powdery mildew. It's a susceptible host. The pathogen is present. We're having, like you were talking about, the condensation, super heavy dews, airflow is good, but still sometimes those things are just out of our control. And so if you know that you have at least 2 of those important pieces of the triangle, we need to go ahead and be doing some preventative. Oh, good picture, Natalie. You went ahead and pulled it up.
Celeste and I were like on the same brainwave there, as Greg was talking about. Powdery mildew is one of those that you don't have to have a whole bunch of leaf wetness. You need kind of fluctuations in humidity that allow it to kind of reproduce when it's moister, and then as it dries out, it just spreads. And so we say this like excited pathologists. It has been great weather for powdery mildew lately.
For sure.
I didn't know that West Tennessee had humidity, Celeste, but I'll take your word for it.
Oh, yes, please do. Please do. Oh, great conversations. Okay, so I'm going to shift our gears here for just a second because I love this question. It's very, very timely. It comes to us from Washington County. Okay, it says, I'm curious about the best winter cover crops to use here in my area. I'm looking to, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading this. It's very small. I'm looking to till in nutrients in the spring. How much seed for a 20 by 50 vegetable garden? So there's lots of things going on in this question. And I will say that actually you have quite a few options available to you. I know that we've talked about cover crops here in the past. Bob gave us a really good link that we're going to attach to the answer and the pictures that go into our interactive map. Bob, do you want to share a little bit just about some timely options? Because now is the time to be considering our winter cover crops for veggie gardens.
Yes, I answered that question and provided that link. And one of the things that came to my mind was how large the space that she was talking about, because she indicated she was having trouble finding seed or didn't want to have to buy a 50-pound bag to take care of the space. And it ended up being about 1,000 square feet so that it really it's not going to take that many pounds of seed if you look at per 1,000 square feet that is recommended as for these cover crops for the winter. So some different options, and there are pluses and minuses to some of those, but a choice that the homeowner is going to make and think about. One of the comments related to the ryegrass, it's not on this particular table, but you want to think about how long you want it to grow in the spring before you try to get rid of it. What's your cropping plan for the spring, and be ready to do that. But all of them do a great job of adding organic matter and providing that biomass that we can return back to the soil and try to increase the percent of organic matter in our soils, which is a great benefit.
So true. And I'm going to throw in there that I really like to do a mix. So I like to have at least one component here of these small grains or grasses to really provide a lot of biomass that I am going to be able to, turn that back into the soil and really help promote building organic matter in the following spring. And then I want to go down here to this table. This is the document that we shared, and so will be available to everyone. Here is a short list of some legumes that are excellent that you can actually mix in with some of those grains and grasses. It doesn't have to be a solid planting of crimson clover or a solid planting of wheat or rye or, et cetera, et cetera. You can make up a little specialized mix. And I'll tell you a trick, visit your local farm supply store. This time of year, most of our local farm supply stores are actually offering all of these for sale by the pound. And you don't have to buy a whole 50-pound bag. You can go in there. Like I'm thinking, we have a local place called R&J Feed. And if you go over to their sportsman's area, they are really promoting these products for folks to use for their build their wildlife food plots. And so go visit those areas. You can use all those same things just in a different function as cover crops for your vegetable gardens.
Hey, Celeste, I want to echo what you just said, and I was going to make that comment. Not the big box stores typically, but your small farm supply stores, they'll have a bag or two of those open. They can pull it out, weigh it out by the pound, and they can sell you that. Now, remember, if you're going to make up your own mixed blend and you're mixing all those together, you have to adjust the weights of those to kind of correspond. If you're doing the full crimson clover, it may tell you a pound or 2 pounds for this, but if you mix something else in with it, you don't go at that same max rate. You've got to adjust those out. So all those plants are not competing with each other when they come up for nutrients.
Good point. That would be, like you triple or quadruple planted, wouldn't it? So got to keep that in mind.
And I put a link in the chat box, which was actually a fall cover crop trial that was done here in East Tennessee. Now, just a little bit east, this is not quite Johnson City, but right here in Knoxville, that was comparing different mixtures and the biomass productivity. And so kind of the short version of that is that for right now, as we're in kind of September and the early part of October, you have that whole crop mix window open to you. So those mixtures of the grasses and the legumes can work really well because you get good germination in this warmer time. Once you get later in the fall, say late October, the early part of November, lots of times we tend to move a little bit more towards those grasses, say a cereal rye, some of those, because you're going to get the best germination later as germination conditions are a little bit more challenging. So right now you kind of have that whole suite. And so some of those grass legume mixtures can work really well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I went ahead and pulled it up just so that y'all could lay your eyes on it and be a little familiar with that. And of course, their recommendations here are per acre. So you'll have to do a little math to get them down to pounds per 1,000 square feet, but that's okay. We're good at math, right? Okay, let me get back to my questions. So I think we've got time to do, let's do some fruit questions. We've been kind of hanging out in the vegetable zone. Let's shift over to the strawberry. Oh, great. You want to do the grape question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I already pulled up the grapes. So this, I believe, may be an August picture, Greg, but we're definitely in kind of the late season grape territory. And I know you do your own grape joy and disease battle there on the plateau. So what do you think?
So just looking at it, and I think you had some images of some leaves too that kind of confirm this. There are a number of disease pathogens that can impact grapes, fungal type diseases. And if I just looked at the image here, I probably couldn't differentiate between black rot or sour rot or some of the other fruiting anthracnose diseases that could impact those leaves. But obviously, I know that there was some kind of fungal disease going on. But when I tie in the images that we had of the leaves on this and the angular structure that those leaves has and the spotting on those leaves, I would say that that is black rot. And black rot is one of the most devastating fruits that we have in our grapes. And it's one that I don't want to say it's easy to control, but I don't want to say it's hard to control. Generally, the problem with trying to control black rot is it's a disease that has to be sprayed in the bloom period, primarily of that fruiting grape. And so we start that spray program very early in the season when we first get those short green tips. We spray through the bloom period, and we do have cover sprays throughout the season to prevent some of these other diseases. But black rot is specifically one that really needs it. The control has to start in the springtime. And unfortunately, generally, I get homeowners this time of year coming in and saying, you know, my grape clusters are completely rotting and shriveling up. What can I do? And the answer is next spring, get on a good spray program as a preventative, because when it gets to that juncture, you're there at the end of the season, you're in August, there's not going to be a thing that you can do to really control that. And one thing that I would say, and I've heard Dr. Lockwood say this 1,000 times, if you skip one year because you thought you lost a grape crop and you don't do anything in terms of prevention, you'll have to work twice as hard the next year to control diseases in those. And
I was gonna go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, our Home Fruit publication really kind of spells out what stage of plant growth and when to start putting those cover sprays on grapes. And grapes and peaches and pears, those are, in my opinion, our three hardest fruits to grow. And it's really tough to grow grapes in this part of the world organically.
And let me add, so going back to how you mentioned it can be hard to tell, right, what fruit rot disease is affecting our fruit clusters. And here is a neat little diagnostic tip that I learned last year, and it has just stuck with me. So black rot can actually set in earlier in the season. You can have clusters of fruit that are immature, you know, they're not fully filled, they haven't begun to really create those sugars yet. And so black rot might be present. You might be seeing that earlier in the season all the way through maturity of those clusters. But a ripe fruit rot, say like bitter rot, only begins to show once those sugars have started developing in a term they call viration, I think, grape people. So just kind of being out in your vines and being vigilant and knowing, have I been seeing some drying individual grapes on these clusters earlier in the season, or did this really not start until we were well on into summer when those fruits are really starting to ripen? Because that is going to be able to help you decide which is your major issue. But guess what? Control, still the same approach. We've got to do all the things that Greg already mentioned. So
do we have the picture of the leaves that you could throw up there real quick? You may not.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I'm sorry.
Well, so I would just tell homeowners, all these diseases have really distinct characteristics. And it's black rot's not the only one, anthracnose, downy mildew, and you might see every single one of these in a vineyard at the same time. So
Yeah.
there's telltale signs of leaf structure and what Celeste talked about. When did you start seeing that disease show up? Are all cues in identifying pest problems in your garden or your orchard.
Yeah. Okay, I want to get two more fruit questions in before we transition. So let's go with our strawberries. Natalie, you want to go with in the direction of our strawberries? We had a question coming in talking about their strawberries. We're showing some leaf diseases, wondering if that's treatable. What should their approach be? And so this is a great time of year to talk about this, especially if you're doing matted row, which is what a lot of homeowners are, perennializing their strawberries and growing them year after year and renovating. So what are some things we need to know?
Yeah, so when we look at this strawberry plant, of course, we see it is growing in a perennial system. Most likely we see straw in the background. The first thing that's going to come to my mind is going to be anthracnose, which is one of the most common diseases that we see. And once again, Greg and some others have kind of said this too, is I would also ask, did you see issues on your fruit? Because anthracnose also has very characteristic fruit damage, kind of circular. When that lesion gets kind of moist, you'll see some almost peachy kind of ooze. So and actually, we'll see anthracnose fruit issues on peppers and lots of other things. And so some of those characteristics remain the same. Now, when I think about strawberries and anthracnose, yes, we do have some spray guidelines, but in a perennial production system, once we get high infection levels, I start to think more about, it might be a good time to maybe put in some new strawberry plants next spring and maybe cycle out some of these plants, because once you get heavy disease loads, this is the reason why almost all commercial growers in our neck of the woods grow in a more plasticulture system, because it's a very challenging climate in which to handle some of these anthracnose diseases. So Greg, Bob, what are your thoughts on strawberries? Would you spray them? Would you go shopping? What do you think?
Yeah, I think plant health is probably the biggest thing in environment. And, I would tell even homeowners, you can do plasticulture as well, just like a commercial. I know my dad for years would grow 2 rows of plasticulture strawberries, and then he'd pull them out, and then he would plant his other vine crops on those sites each year. But that's what he used culturally to control those diseases, especially with strawberries. That's going to be anthracnose. One thing that I did notice, and I think from a learning standpoint of us on this line, whether it's strawberry diseases or whatever, Celeste, if you'll put that picture back up there, or have it to where
Natalie, can you put it back up for me?
One thing that I wanted to encourage people, if you notice, look at the spots on that leaf to the left, how you see that purplish banding around those spots. And when we start thinking about looking at those disease characteristics, and if you're doing your own diagnostics at home, where is the disease occurring? And so you can see, Natalie, use your key to show them where we're talking about the zoning. See the purplish there? And a lot of times these fungal pathogens or viral pathogens, whatever the case may be, they will have distinct characteristics of color, rings, where they're located within the veins of those. And those are all characteristics that you can look at to kind of positively identify what pathogen that you're dealing with. And this one here, the purplish rings on that, and the anthracnose and those purplish rings are very common with a lot of fruits. And so that's one thing, not only on the fruit itself, but on the leaf, that you can know ahead of time kind of what you're dealing with here. And once anthracnose gets set up in that bed and that particular environment, especially if that's a matted row, You might keep it at bay a little bit with some fungicide, but you best be looking at the future and moving your bed somewhere else.
Awesome. So I want to add one little thing, not related to the pictures that y'all are showing, but just so everybody kind of knows that this is a thing that's happening in the strawberry world. There's a disease that's not really new, but they've never had issues with this disease on a large scale in production. The people who are providing the strawberry slips to all of our strawberry growers who are growing in plasticulture. And it's called, I'm not going to try to say the whole big word, but they call it NEOP for short, dramatic neopy. And it is a disease that affects not only leaves, but also fruit. So it's a leaf and fruit rot. And it is going to severely impact our strawberry production in the Southeast this year, as the suppliers that most of our people use have identified this in their production stock, and they cannot guarantee clean delivery. And so they gave people an opportunity to back out of their orders. And so you may have some local strawberry growers that you're used to having strawberries every spring who may not have them this coming year, or may have reduced their production because they're a little, scared about inputs and loss. So just know that that's a thing out there. I don't think it's huge for homeowners, but since we're talking about strawberries, I think it's always good to know what's going on in the world around us. So, okay, do we have, what do we talk about this brown turkey fig question? That's kind of a fun one. And then we'll move into ornamentals. So we had a question come in. I can't see what county this is from because my screen is smaller. Let's see. Let me go over it. Knox County. My brown turkey fig has beetles on it. Should I worry? Should I try to control? And also, what is their name? And so I really wanted to share this one with y'all so you could see this insect pest, because it's one that I feel like maybe a lot of people haven't noticed before. Panelists, do we want to inform our viewers on what we're looking at here? I can tell us. It's kudzu bug.
Kudzu bug.
I was gonna say, I think Bob had that one. Yeah.
It's a kudzu bug. Anybody want to fill us in a little?
Well, yes, it is. And I tell you, I've never seen this before. Great photographs.
Really?
Yeah, on the figs. And so the question from the grower was, is this something that's harming my fig, or should I really be concerned? And it's kind of interesting. This is one of those questions where you go to two different universities and you get two different answers. And for the most, I believe it was North Carolina that indicated, well, they congregate on the figs, but don't do any feeding on the figs. But yet then I found a post from the University of Maryland this spring, actually, where there's a blog and they indicated that there was some actual feeding that was happening from these kudzu bugs on figs in Maryland. So it's one of those happenings that I've never experienced before. So I guess what the key would be that if you have these figs and maybe these might be common in your area, or maybe you've never seen them before, then just to scout and be on the lookout, and then go from there. Seems to be that some of that information that I looked at indicated they're in the stink bug family.
Yes, they are. That's what I was going to say. They are in the stink bug family. And if you ever come in contact with one, you will know immediately, because this is the time of year in West Tennessee, especially, when we start seeing a huge influx in kudzu bugs. So it's kind of seasonal. They've been in our bean crops. They've been doing marginal feeding, but they're not really considered a huge economic pest for those production crops. But we know that is kind of where they are at. And once those crops begin to get harvested, then we see this huge influx of kudzu beetles. They'll be plastered on sides of buildings. They'll be, all over even ornamental plants, things that we wouldn't typically see them on because their habitat just got processed, right? So it takes them a minute to disperse and figure out what they're going to do and where they're going to go. But I'll just be outside and I won't even know that I had a kudzu bug on me. And then I'll start smelling that, distinctive stink bug smell, and it actually kind of irritates my skin. So I've had them brush on me accidentally, and I swipe them off, and they kind of rubbed whatever their oils are that they have on them, and it irritates my skin, kind of burny and itchy. So I don't think that it's a huge pest for these figs. But like you said, that's just variable. So I think knowing, being aware of when they came into the picture, so to speak, is gonna help us identify if they are like an active feeding pest threat to whatever the plant is, whether it's a ornamental plant or, food producing. So
And if
Anybody else?
if their Knoxville figs are like my Knoxville figs, they've pretty much been getting killed back to the ground every winter, the past 2 or 3 winters anyway. So the whole fruit production process has been pretty minimal.
gotcha. All right.